Picture this. It's April 24th, 2026. Somewhere in the waters near Iran, the USS George H.W. Bush, a 100,000-ton floating city of steel and jet fuel, quietly slips into position. And with that, the United States military just did something it hasn't done in over 20 years. 3 aircraft carriers, simultaneously, in the Middle East. The USS Abraham Lincoln. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship ever built. And now the USS George H.W. Bush. That is, 12 ships, over 200 aircraft, more than 15,000 sailors and Marines, all concentrated in one of the most volatile patches of ocean on the planet. The last time America did this was 2003, right before it invaded Iraq. So the question everybody should be asking isn't, wow, that's a lot of ships. The question is, why? What is happening right now that made the most powerful military in human history feel like it needed to park 3 nuclear-powered supercarriers in the same neighborhood at the same time? Because here's what the news isn't telling you clearly enough. This isn't just a show of force. This is the end result of months of strikes, failed negotiations, a naval blockade, assassinations, and a war that most people didn't even know had already started. Today, we are going to walk through every single piece of this, from how we got here, to what's actually at stake, to what happens next. Stay with me. This is one of the most important stories in the world right now. To understand why 3 American supercarriers are now sitting in the Persian Gulf, you have to rewind. Not just a few weeks, but a few years. Because this didn't happen overnight. 2023 and 2024. Israel and Iran are already trading blows. Missile strikes, drone attacks, proxy wars through Hezbollah and Hamas. The region is a tinderbox, and everyone knows it. Then comes June 2025. What historians are already calling the 12-day war. Israel and Iran exchange direct strikes, and crucially, the United States, under the Trump administration, launches airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. That's not a proxy fight anymore. That's America, putting its fingerprints directly on Iran's most sensitive infrastructure. Tehran doesn't forget that. Fast forward to January in 2026. Inside Iran, something extraordinary is happening. The largest protest since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Iranians by the millions are in the streets. And the Iranian government's response? A crackdown so brutal that U.S. officials describe it as a massacre of thousands of civilians. Trump watches this and begins making threats. Then February 2026. Negotiations between the U.S. and Iran over Iran's nuclear program are happening, indirectly through Omani mediators. The Omani foreign minister says progress is being made. Iran appears willing to make concessions. But Trump is reportedly not thrilled with the pace, and then, on February 28th, 2026, everything changes. The United States and Israel launch a massive, coordinated surprise airstrike on Iran. Not just military targets, not just nuclear sites. They assassinate Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, one of the most significant targeted killings in modern history, along with key Iranian negotiators, including Ali Larijani, in the middle of what were supposed to be peace talks. This is the moment the 2026 Iran war officially begins. Iran's response is immediate and furious. Missile and drone strikes rain down on Israel, on U.S. military bases across the region, and on U.S. allied Arab states, many of which are hosting American troops. Even British bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and Cyprus get hit. The Royal Air Force is scrambled in a defensive capacity, and then Iran does something that shakes the entire global economy. It closes the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, here's why it matters so much. It is a narrow waterway, at its tightest point, just 21 miles wide, that sits between Iran and Oman, and through it flows roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply. Every day. Tankers carrying millions of barrels from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and the UAE have to pass through that choke point to reach global markets. Iran essentially reached out and grabbed the world economy by the throat. Oil prices spike. Global shipping insurance costs skyrocket. Countries start releasing strategic reserves just to stabilize markets. The International Energy Agency, 32 countries together, releases 400 million barrels direct from emergency stockpiles. And America now has a shooting war on its hands in the Middle East, with a global trade crisis layered on top. This is what the 3 aircraft carriers are responding to. Not a threat. An ongoing war, with massive economic stakes for the entire planet. Here's where it gets complicated, and frankly, hard to follow even if you've been paying close attention. Because what happens next isn't a clean military campaign. It's a chaotic, back and forth, almost diplomatic whiplash that plays out across weeks. Early April 2026. Somehow, Pakistan steps in. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif negotiates a ceasefire between the US and Iran. On April 7th, both sides announce an immediate halt to hostilities. For a moment, it looks like the war might actually end, but it doesn't, because within days, the ceasefire starts fraying at every edge. Iran says the deal must include Lebanon, where Israel is still striking Hezbollah. Israel says Lebanon isn't part of the deal. Trump backs Israel. Hezbollah announces it's pausing attacks. Then Israel launches what's described as its strongest wave of strikes on Lebanon since the war began. Iran pauses Hormuz traffic, again in response. By April 9th, ships are once more being blocked from moving through the strait. Neither side has actually stopped fighting. Neither side has actually opened the strait. The ceasefire is, as Vice President J.D. Vance himself calls it, a fragile truce. Then, April 11th. This is a historic moment, even if it got buried in the noise. J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner fly to Islamabad, Pakistan. They sit down with Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. These are the highest-level direct talks between the United States and Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. In 47 years. They talk for Nabo 21 hours straight, and produce nothing. Vance walks out and says Iran refused to accept American terms. Iran's side says gaps remain on major issues. Trust, says Ghalibaf, has not been established. 2 days later, Trump makes his next move. April 13th. Trump declares a full U.S. naval blockade, not just of the Strait of Hormuz, but of all ships trying to enter or leave Iranian ports. Any vessel attempting to reach Iran gets intercepted by the U.S. Navy. Iran calls this an act of war. Iran's foreign minister says the blockade is a prelude to a ceasefire violation. Iran's Interim Leadership Council warns that attacking a country during negotiations sets a dangerous global precedent that will make future diplomacy impossible. Meanwhile, U.S. Navy destroyers enter the Strait of Hormuz for mine-clearing operations, the first American vessels there since the war began. Iran threatens to attack them. CENTCOM says the ships are focused on freedom of navigation. The standoff tightens. By April 19th, the U.S. has seized an Iranian cargo ship, and it says was evading the blockade. Iran seizes 2 cargo ships of its own in response. Trump escalates his language. He threatens that Iran will be blown up. If negotiations fail, he says he'll target power plants, bridges. He tells Iran that if he doesn't get a deal, he would target Iranian infrastructure that, in the words of Iranian opposition leader Reza Pahlavi, Iranians would need to rebuild their country. On April 21st, Trump extends the ceasefire, but instructs the blockade to remain in place and tells the military to stay ready to resume fighting. The U.S. blockade, by now, has redirected 34 ships. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warns that Iran's main oil export terminal at Karg Island is days away from having full storage, meaning Iran would soon have nowhere to send its oil even if the strait were open. The economic stranglehold is tightening. And as of April 25th, Trump has canceled the next round of peace talks in Pakistan, reportedly just days before negotiators were supposed to travel. Iran threatens to completely close the Strait of Hormuz and strike vital energy and desalination infrastructure across the region. Desalination plants, the drinking water supply for millions of people across the Gulf. This is the world that the 3 aircraft carriers sailed into. Let's talk about what it actually means, militarily, strategically, to have 3 supercarriers in the same theater at the same time. Because numbers like 200 aircraft and 15,000 sailors can sound abstract. Let me make it concrete. A single U.S. carrier strike group, one carrier, is widely considered more powerful than the entire military of most countries on Earth. It can project air power hundreds of miles inland. It can sustain combat sorties around the clock. And it does all of this without needing permission from any host nation. No air bases to negotiate for, no foreign governments to placate. Now triple that. The 3 carriers currently in the Middle East are the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, and USS George H.W. Bush, CVN-77. Together they bring electronic warfare jets, the EA-18G Growler, capable of blinding enemy radar and communications, 5th-generation stealth strike fighters, the F-35C Lightning II, workhorse strike jets, the FA-18 Super Hornet, logistics aircraft, anti-submarine helicopters, the full spectrum. The last time the U.S. had 3 carriers in this region was 2003, and that was in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. Now, one of these carriers has an extraordinary backstory that tells you something about just how seriously the Pentagon is taking this deployment. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship ever built, has been at sea for more than 10 months. One of the most operationally demanding deployments of any American carrier in recent decades. Its tour has taken it from the Caribbean, where U.S. forces conducted strikes on alleged drug smuggling vessels, and in a stunning operation, seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, to the ongoing Iran conflict. In March, a laundry fire broke out aboard the Ford, forcing it to put into port in Croatia for repairs. But it returned to operations and transited back into the Red Sea in time to remain available for U.S. strike planning. 10 months at sea, a fire, and still in position. That tells you something about the operational tempo the U.S. is running at. Then there's the USS George H.W. Bush, the newest arrival, which took a fascinating route to get there. Rather than the conventional path through the Mediterranean Sea and Suez Canal, the Bush sailed around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. A longer, harder journey, but one that deliberately avoided the contested Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The U.S. military wasn't going to risk its third carrier running a gauntlet of Houthi missiles just to save time. It took the long way around. That kind of careful operational planning tells you the U.S. is treating this as a long-term deployment, not a quick show of force. And here's the strategic logic of having all three here simultaneously. Sustained strike capability. 3 carriers can rotate flight operations, so there is always aircraft in the air. No rest cycles, no gaps, continuous pressure, escalation deterrence. Any Iranian military commander looking at 200 aircraft and 12 ships has to calculate whether any escalation on their part is survivable. The message is being sent without a word being spoken. Negotiating leverage. Every day those carriers sit in position. Iran's oil storage fills up, its economy tightens, and the clock runs on Tehran. The military posture is the economic and diplomatic pressure made physical. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the blockade will continue for as long as it takes, whatever President Trump decides. Senator Lindsey Graham put it bluntly, the blockade is a new source of pressure for the Iranian government, and he has set strict conditions for any agreement. The carriers aren't just a threat. They're a statement of timeline. We can do this indefinitely. Can you? So where does this end? Let's be honest, nobody knows. And anyone telling you they know for certain is selling something. But here's what we can say with confidence, based on what's actually happening right now. The Strait of Hormuz is the key. This entire conflict, the war, the blockade, the negotiations, the 3 carriers, comes down to that 21-mile wide passage. Iran wants control of it. The U.S. wants it open. Neither has fully backed down. The ceasefire framework calls for an immediate halt to hostilities, the reopening of the strait, and a 15 to 20-day negotiating window to reach a permanent settlement. Iran has said it must retain the right to enrich uranium, though it's indicated the level may be negotiable. The U.S. wants zero enrichment. That's a massive gap. Meanwhile, there's another problem that negotiators are quietly worried about. Who in Iran can actually sign a deal? U.S. officials have suspected a significant divide between Iran's negotiating team, led by Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister IRGC, and the hardliners in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC has its own power, its own interests. Any agreement signed by the diplomats has to survive the IRGC's veto. Trump extended the ceasefire, but already canceled the next round of talks. Iran's side dismissed the extension as meaning nothing. And the 3 carriers remain in position. What this means for you, and yes, this does affect you, is straightforward. Oil prices. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply. Every day it stays closed or restricted, energy costs ripple outward, food prices, shipping costs, manufacturing costs. This isn't a Middle East problem. It's a global economy problem wearing a Middle East costume. And geopolitically, China is watching. Russia is watching. Every regional power is taking notes on how this plays out, on whether American military pressure can actually force a nuclear-armed regional power to concede, or whether it only hardens resolve. This is one of the most consequential standoffs in a generation. The last time America parked 3 aircraft carriers here, it was because it was about to change a country forever. What happens this time, whether it's a deal, a return to fighting, or some tense, grinding, indefinite standoff, will shape the Middle East for decades. And as of right now, the USS Abraham Lincoln, the USS Gerald R. Ford, and the USS George H.W. Bush are on station, flight decks ready, waiting to find out which it's going to be. If this video helped you actually understand what's happening, not just the headlines, but the why, hit that like button It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Subscribe if you want to stay on top of this as it develops. We'll be covering every major development as the negotiations, or the fighting, continues. And drop the comment. Do you think a deal gets done? Or does this escalate? I'll see you in the next one.